Welcome to Sustain the Flame, an online experience of vocational exploration. What's a vocation, you ask? It's any meaningful, life-giving work you do for others. But what if you're not sure what's meaningful to you or life-giving to others? What if you don't know what kind of work you want to do or type of person you want to be? What if you have no idea what God is up to in your life? We're here to help you with that. Each day, we're going to talk with experts to connect your life with God's mission around the themes of discovery, discernment, development, and decision making. This 4D faith model is designed to give you clear definitions and practical tools to discover the options available, to discern what you value, develop your skills, and to decide your next steps with courage. Join us on this journey of vocational exploration.
Thank you so much, friends. That was Ms. Gabrielle Hudacek, who is the Assistant Director for Admission Seminary Recruiter here at Trinity Lutheran Seminary and Capital University. And I am Drew Tucker. I am the University Pastor here. And today's theme is Discover. And we have two great guests to discuss that topic with you, Ms. Mary Claire Kunkel and Deacon Jenny Franz. Like any journey you take, to explore your vocation means you have an opportunity to discover new things, new kinds of work, hobbies, a way of life, new possibilities for the kind of person that you want to be, new ways to reach the goals that you've set for yourself. And like any other journey, to discover something new means you must go new places, try new things, seek new opportunities, learn new data, even when they're uncomfortable and even when you're not sure how it's going to turn out. To know what's possible for your vocation, you must discover what exists. So today we're going to hear from Mary Claire and Jenny about the ways they help other people discover new things and the ways that they have discovered new opportunities in their lives. So let me introduce you first to Mary Claire Kunkel, who is a rising senior at Capital University, hailing from Cincinnati, Ohio. Her position as an official apologist for Skyline Chili and Reds gear on MLB's opening day will tell you of that origin. She served as the president of Embrace Ministries. She's a leader in her sorority and was named Capital University's Emerging Leader of the Year in 2018. You'll find her at work as a film and media production major, crafting stories to help people discover new, different, and engaging knowledge. So Mary Claire, thanks for being with us today. Tell us a bit about your work and how you help people discover what is and what is possible.
Yes, as mentioned, my name is Mary Claire Kunkel. I'm a fourth-year undergraduate student at Capital University, majoring in film and media production. I always hesitate telling people my major for fear of the question immediately preceding, which is, what are you planning to do with that? And it's always very earnest in nature, but I always feel somewhat exposed. There's so many things that seem cool: podcasts, journalism, writing, casting, set dressing, directing, comedy, maybe seminary. We'll get back to it. I'm better at telling people what I don't want to do, which is anything with bodily fluids and like science and math, and the same thing forever and ever. Amen. In the sea of endless interests, I often get paralyzed with indecision and inaction. I've always loved storytelling. I remember playing with dolls as a kid and having more fun crafting the storyline than actually acting it out. I inhaled books, dabbled in writing my own short stories, and edited little videos to make my classmates laugh, even graced the stage a few times. Storytelling can be traced throughout my life, but it's constantly taking shape in different forms, which is both kind of cool and also super annoying because I never know what's going to happen next. I decided on my major because film was something I had put my feet in, but hadn't really explored that much. I wanted to discover what it had to offer. Yet, when I started along the path, I experienced intense creative burnout. Everyone seemed to be better than me, and everything I did felt derivative of something else. I really struggled with my identity as a self-proclaimed creative. But discovery isn't meant to be done alone. When you're struggling to see your gifts in a sea of self-doubt, sometimes it takes another set of eyes. The first semester of my first year of college, my advisor approached me. I had gotten heavily involved in the university radio station, and she pointed out to me that I had a good voice for radio. I was choosing to take this as a compliment. I agreed to run the station during this mock disaster preparedness simulation the communications department was doing. It was there I conducted my first interview, live broadcasted, with an esteemed faculty member. I was terrified, but I rolled with it. Then more interviews and more interviews that day. I started to get the hang of it. That following fall, I was selected for a course where we would be making a 50-minute historical documentary. I was eager for the opportunity. This time I didn't just conduct interviews, I transcribed them too. Then over the course of the rest of my years so far, I learned how to pull the best bits of information out. I learned how to scour Ancestry.com and library archives searching for connections. I learned how to find a through line in pounds of information. I learned how to tell that story, blending my voice with others. All of this was possible because my advisor pointed out in me gifts I didn't realize I had. Then she provided me opportunities to actualize them for myself. I often still get very frustrated when I struggle to make a camera sing or don't master new software as fast as my peers. But that's the beauty of it all. Just read Corinthians 12. If the foot would say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? We all have different gifts. God designed us to. And speaking of Bible verses, that brings me to the other side of discovery. Finding gifts you're not sure you want. Like how the projects I find the most meaningful, God always makes a cameo in. Or how the most fulfilled I've ever felt is while spending my summers in community with various nonprofit organizations. When people come up to me and tell me I have a gift after I preach, and I shut it down. So I'm not really super sure what to do with all of my gifts because I keep discovering them and I keep discovering also what I'm not good at. All I know is that I really love storytelling and I really love God. And there's ways to mix those two things together, and it's okay if it's not the same throughout my whole life.
Mary Claire, thank you so much for sharing parts of your story with us. I am so excited to dive into more of that in just a few minutes. But first, I'm going to hand it off to Gabrielle to introduce our second speaker.
Thank you, Pastor Drew. I'd like to introduce to you Jenny France, who is currently serving as the Director of Congregational Relations in Camp Luther for Lutheran Outdoor Ministries in Ohio. We know it as LOMO. Jenny is rostered as a deacon in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and she holds a Master's of Arts in Lay Ministry with youth and family emphasis from Trinity Lutheran Seminary, no doubt, and a BA in education from Capital University. Jenny's hobbies include being a board game champion, curator of useless knowledge. These are Jenny's words, mind you. Trivia nights are her jam. A dabbler in knitting and a Cleveland Indians fanatic. She's expressed, go Tribe. She also says that tent camping, hiking, road tripping, and world traveling are in her veins. I myself have known Jenny for some time. First, while she was a student at Trinity Lutheran Seminary, while I worked at the Synod office coordinating candidacy as an administrative assistant. And then later, I was blessed to have Jenny as my fieldwork supervisor during her call at Christ Lutheran Church Bexley. And at the time, I was working on my Master of Arts in Lay Ministry at Trinity Lutheran Seminary. Welcome, Jenny. And please tell us a little about your journey and how new discoveries influenced your life and led you where you are today in your personal and professional life.
All right, thank you so much. I actually want to start with a photo for all of you. This photo was taken in about 1990, and it's my family of origin. It's my three sisters, my mother, and my father. I am the person right in front in the middle, in case you are curious about that. When we look at this photo as my family, we laugh a lot. Partially because we think this photo really shows the personality of a lot of the people in my family. Partially because of the extreme attitude my sister is showing in this photo. You may notice that as well. But we also love this photo partially because this was before my family started quite a journey. One that at the time we really didn't know that much about. You see, around this time, my family went to camp for the first time. We loved it, and it started a lifelong tradition. But we also went to camp because the pastor of our church thought it would be a good place for my dad to do some discernment of his own. Not long after this, in 1991, my dad went to seminary at Trinity Lutheran Seminary. My entire family moved to Columbus, Ohio, so that my dad could follow God's call. I cannot even begin to tell you what kind of a profound effect that move has had on my and my entire family's life. It taught me at a young age that listening to God's call is important, that it's okay to change careers, and that God provides. Flash forward about 10 years, and I'm a student at Capital University. I started as a vocal music education major. But in my very first semester, I listened to my gut and to my passions, and I changed to early childhood education and intervention education. I love music. I really love music. But I decided I didn't want to spend my life dissecting it. And the day I changed my major, I felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. So imagine my surprise then when in the fall of my senior year while student teaching, I realized that I did not want to teach in the classroom after all. I loved teaching. I loved working with children, but I didn't want to be inside and deal with the current educational system. So here I was, months from graduating, and I had no idea what was next. I spent a lot of time talking to my parents and was reminded that it's okay to change your career path and to listen, and that God will provide. The year I graduated from college, my parents moved to a new city. The home that I thought I knew no longer contained my family or my stuff, and I couldn't go back to it. I had also been spending the year on the road, staying in different host homes every single night, and I spent a lot of other time staying in other people's homes without knowing where mine was. So over Christmas break that year, I visited a friend in Columbus, and while visiting, he had an errand to run at Trinity Lutheran Seminary. And when I walked in the building, I had this overwhelming sense of being home, and it shocked me. And I knew I had to pay attention to that. So the next year, I started working on a master's in lay ministry with a youth and family emphasis at Trinity. You see, sometimes God's call starts with an internal feeling. I could go on for hours telling you all the twists and turns over the next few years, but in reality, the path was much more clear, I think, than even I ever realized. You remember that photo I showed you? My family getting ready to head off on an adventure. And I also mentioned that that was about the time my family went to camp for the first time. Well, camp became our constant. Through moves and life changes, camp was the place that we went back to every single year. Camp felt like home. And it was that sense of home and that desire to find it that led me to outdoor ministries. My thought was a theology degree could really complement my education degree for a career at camp. And turns out that education degree was still important. God provides. Before I graduated, a local pastor approached me about working in their congregation doing youth ministry. I was flattered, and initially when he asked, I said, no, I don't want to work at a church. I want to work at camp. And he was kind and patient and smart, because he said, why don't you think about this for a couple weeks and pray about it, and I'll check back in with you. And as I started to tell my parents about this offer, my dad immediately started to question my decision. It was a great opportunity, a way to get field hours, maybe some income. I could do this while I was finishing my degree. Maybe I should reconsider. And then I talked to the pastor of our community, and she said the same thing. And then I talked to my advisor and my supervisor, and suddenly everyone around me was in chorus telling me that I should reconsider this offer. So I paid attention, and I went back to Pastor Tim and I said, yes, I'll do this for 1 year while I finish my degree. And Pastor Tim said, well, maybe someday there's a way we can incorporate this position with outdoor ministry too. You never know. I spent 8.5 years then at Christ Lutheran in Bexley as the director of youth and family ministry, and I loved it. You see, sometimes God's call starts externally through people that you love and you trust. As I started to feel a sense that it was time for me to move on from Christ Bexley, an opportunity to start an outdoor ministry came up, to be the director of that very camp that had felt like home for my family all those years, the one constant in my life. The challenge was that the camp director was part-time, and I would need a full-time job with benefits if I was going to leave my current job. And then I remembered a conversation I'd had with Pastor Tim years before, this idea that maybe outdoor ministry could be a part of my job at some point in the future, right? So I had this idea, what if I spent the school year working at church and the summer working at camp, and we could somehow work together? I really didn't think the church would go for it. I mean, why would they be okay for me coming in and saying, I want to be full-time? I don't want to be full-time. I now want to be 3/4 time. But somehow they said yes. In fact, they supported this change of call. And I was shocked and elated. God provides. 2 years later, the rhythm of camp and youth ministry became too hard for me, and my call changed again. I talked with Pastor Tim about what I was feeling, and he also felt that they needed someone full-time again. And in my conversation with him, I felt God's tug internally, but I also heard Pastor Tim's words. God's call is internal and external. I left Christ Bexley over 4 years ago for a full-time role with Lutheran Outdoor Ministries in Ohio. And looking back, I can see that ways that my life was preparing me for this vocation, not vacation. And the moves that forced me to make new friends fast and to put myself out there prepared me to meet people new every week. My love of theater in high school showed me how to be in front of a crowd. The teaching and education background taught me how to write and implement curriculum. The year living in host homes taught me a lot about hospitality. And this theology degree that helps me have important faith conversations I can't imagine life without. I could go on. And these skills and lessons could be used in lots of other ways too, yes. But I learned something at a very young age. Listening to God's call is important, both internally and externally, that it's okay to change careers, and that God would provide. My parents taught me well.
Oh, Jenny, thank you so much. I know we have tons to talk about. And one of the reasons why I'm so glad that you and Mary Claire are here together today is because I know, in fact, that you share a passion for film in a different kind of way. Back when we used to have these things called movie theaters, it's called January of 2020, which I'm fairly certain was 38.5 years ago. But back then, I know while Jenny doesn't usually get vacations, that she would spend her off time at movie theaters as much as humanly possible. It was board games or movie theaters. And so I know there's a lot of storytelling connection, a lot of discovery connection between Mary Claire's creation of film and Jenny's appreciation of film. But I want to ask a first question about something that you said, Jenny, but I think both of you have some real experience with and desire for. You talked about camp as a place of constant. And I think there's really something significant that I haven't thought about before about having that constant space in the midst of discovering new things, about what that place can provide you as you are discovering new things. So I'm curious if you would talk a little bit about what it is to have a place of home or a place of safety, even as you're constantly discovering, oh man, maybe my call is changing. Or for Mary Claire, oh man, maybe I don't know that I like these new gifts that I am discovering. So what's it like to have that place of safety and security?
It's a really great question. And I think that was something that was really important to me. It was like you said, a place of safety was what was most important. I think that what's interesting is camp does change year to year, despite what people might think or say or do. Yes, we have very important traditions that if they don't happen, we'll go crazy. But at the same time, there are things that change. The people who camp with you, a lot of them may be the same, but you may have different people, or you connect with people in different ways year to year. I think for me, it was something familiar. It was something safe. When other things changed, I knew that there was something that I could be rooted back in. Some of those familiar traditions that I'm like, I know this is going to happen and I can rely on this and it's going to be great. But also what was important to me was knowing that safe place where I could have those conversations, those deep conversations. Because there's something about being in a community, whether that's camp or school or where it is, where you know people aren't going to judge you for the wild-brained ideas that you have. In fact, sometimes those wild-brained ideas are exactly the things that people latch onto and become the most amazing parts of your life. And so I think it's absolutely important to have that community that you can bounce off of and you know it's going to be safe. Yeah.
That's great. Mary Claire, how about you?
I was sitting here trying to think of what that place is for me. And my first thought was people like my family who have known me a long time. And so, especially my grandma, who kind of like can read me better than I can read myself sometimes. But as far as places go, I think it's the city of Cincinnati. Like, I grew up north of the city, but I had friends from all over because of where I went to high school. But also in my summers, I grew up going to an organization called Summer Impact, where we served with different nonprofit organizations, and then also had I went with my youth group, and so we would like play cards and all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up working there the summer after my first year of college and my second year of college. And even now, just being in those same parks or going to those same organizations, just remembering all of the memories and then also seeing how those organizations have grown is just really cool. And it always is very grounding for me. Yeah.
Can I add into that too, that yeah, to see how the places have grown, but I think when you have a place that grounds you, it also tells you how you have grown, and shows you the ways in which you have changed and discovered yourself too.
That's good. That's real good. Ms. Gabrielle, do you have any questions?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I want to direct something to Ms. Jenny. You had mentioned in some material you supplied me that you had spent a gap year with Youth Encounter. Tell me a little bit about that and how that shaped you in your discovery journey.
Yeah, Jenny,
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yeah, this is one of the things that Pastor Drew and I have in common, actually. He and I have both did this same experience, different years, although the irony is we actually shared a teammate.
Hi, Bree.
Hi, Bree. How's it going? Anyway, that's exactly the experience that I was mentioning about staying in different host homes every single night. So this group, basically, it's a traveling music ministry team. You rehearse songs, you're basically a band, but you're doing concerts if you will, programs in churches, nursing homes, daycares, prisons, basically anywhere that'll book you, you're doing this program. And excuse me, the whole time you're staying in host homes. And so you get somewhere new, you meet people, and then you stay at their house that night, and the next day you leave. So there are literally hundreds of families that I have met for 24 hours or less. And for me, it was all in Minnesota, North and South Dakota. And there are things I learned about myself that year, a lot about leadership and conflict management. I learned that we can be really terrible people sometimes to each other. Seriously. And we do it when we think we're right and we think we're doing it in a loving way. And yet we can be really awful because we don't listen and we don't take the time to look at each other's perspectives. But I do want to mention, I mentioned that it taught me a lot about hospitality too, because there were definitely houses I walked into where I felt welcome immediately. And there were definitely places I walked into that I did not feel welcome at all. And so I really tried to embrace those things and learn from those. And that has definitely been a way that I've tried to live not only my own personal life when people come to visit, but at camp as well.
Oh my goodness. I am going to tell a brief story about a host home experience where I learned something about hospitality. And that experience is, if your kids don't want the people in your house, maybe don't invite them. So we were staying at this house in an unnamed state because I don't want to out anyone who happened to be about 16 at this time in 2004, 2005. And it was clear that the parents had invited our team to stay at their house because they wanted a positive influence for their kids who had no interest in us being positive influences for us. So one of the things that I think it probably happened with you, Jenny, is sometimes parents would make their kids give up their bedrooms so we would have comfortable places to sleep, and then they would sleep on couches or air mattresses or whatever. It was very uncomfortable for us. Usually the kids were fine with it. I went to get into bed that night and I found an opened, half-eaten banana under the covers. So it was just so clear that he did not want us there. And at some level, that's fine. Part of this discovery piece with hospitality is understanding when you're not wanted or welcome, you just acknowledge that and then move on. And so we acknowledged it. We threw that banana in the trash can. We said nothing about it to anybody, and then we went on our merry way. Sometimes you learn the most about hospitality when you realize this is a clear intentional lack of hospitality, not just, oh, they forgot to do something. There was cause.
Right.
Mary Claire, I have a question for you. So you said something about, if I wrote it down right, discovering gifts that I'm not sure that I want. So I'm not asking you what those gifts are, but I am asking you, what is it like to make that discovery? What does that feel like? Can you describe to us a little bit about that experience and just give us some more of your reaction to that?
I think a big part of it is the resistance. So for me, when you want to do something and then you kind of realize that's not what is supposed to happen, I think a big thing for me, and I can share this, I very adamantly don't want to work in a church for some reason. But ever since I was little, I loved going to church. I loved the songs, I loved the skits, I loved the crafts. I remember going to VBS and wanting to be the person in charge of story time, and then I did, and I loved it, and I would take the little VBS things and I'd spruce them up to make them exciting for the kids and then accidentally scare them. And I have always loved the storytelling aspect, but I don't know what to do with it. And when people identify that in me, I think it's a big part of I get scared because I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to try to factor it into the identity or the image of myself that I've created. And so it's resisting when I know I probably shouldn't resist because I'm scared.
Sure.
Well, tagging on to that, I see that you are the president of Embrace Ministries. Can you fill in some blanks with your role there? When we're talking about ministry roles, and here you are the president. Can you speak to that for me and for those who are listeners?
I remember when we were talking about home earlier, my first semester, I had trouble making friends. And I remember that Thursday of the first week, it was the organization fair, and there was a booth for Embrace. And they're like, hey, come to our worship service tonight. And I remember walking in, and they were singing all of these songs that I remember singing as a kid. And I had this overwhelming sensation of home. And I was like, wow, I want to be a part of this. And so I got really involved and wanted to get more involved. So then I was president-elect my sophomore year and president my junior year. And through my presidency this past year, like a lot of different things happened. And I learned a lot about leadership and when to take responsibility and when to know that you don't need to think everything is your fault all the time. And I don't know, I've always had this attraction to being a part of the church and being in leadership with it. But I think the traditional model of how that looks like as a career, I know at my core isn't something that I want. And so I just don't know how to navigate it. And so it's this push and pull of being involved and then getting burnt out and then taking a step back. And I find that in a lot of areas of my life where I dive all the way in and then I'm like, I don't know if this is right. And then diving back out and trying to see all of the different parts of who I am and all of my different interests and knowing what to do with it when I have no idea what that is.
If only there were someone on this call who had said, you know what, like maybe I could have 2 or 3 different careers at the same time and just see if that would work. Like if only there were some way.
You know, if only there was somebody who said, I don't want to work in a church.
But the thing I think about that is, and you know, I've known Mary Claire for goodness, 3 years now, is that I always want to honor those realities that church work is not meant for every Christian. That's okay. At least in terms of professional full-time ministry church work, all of us are called to have some kind of life work in the gospel. But in terms of being paid to work at a church, that doesn't need to be everybody. The thing I think is powerful about Jenny's story and the way that it's matching some of what Mary Claire is experiencing is that the typical models don't have to be the model anymore. That we can find new ways to maybe serve the church without getting burnt out by the church. And as someone who's been ordained for more than 5 years, but less than 10, I feel already both the great gift that campus ministry is to me because it allows me to not get burnt out in the way that some of my colleagues do, and also a real fear that it's still very possible to get burnt out without new ways of finding life. And honestly, doing ministry just like this, finding time in the way of COVID or in the era of COVID to be gathering with you all to have this conversation, this is what keeps me going. This is the kind of stuff that really gives me life, even as we have no idea how this is going to turn out. And I'm trusting that Alex is going to make it great. So thanks, buddy. It's going to be awesome. But that actually brings me to Jenny. I have a question for you that just kind of dawned on me as you're talking about the value of camp and the way that it helped you discover this sense of you and your call. How is Lomo responding to the era of COVID and continuing to offer some of these discovery opportunities? What are you all doing to try to make this transition for this strange season?
That's a really great question that I think we're still figuring out as well. You know, I tell people that one of my favorite parts of my job, and I will say this over and over again, is working with people who are college age or young adults and helping them discover their passions and helping them to discover their vocations. And one of the things that I am mourning most this summer, because we have chosen not to offer any of our traditional camping programs, is that opportunity to be in a community with young adults and to have those conversations. And so it is a very different ministry, and it looks very different right now. Right now, I am using my condo because I have been staying at home as a personal video recording studio. And basically, I'm just recording myself singing songs and playing games and doing crafts and posting them. And the reality of that is, though, the challenge is that we're probably only then connecting with the people we already have relationships with. And so the challenge is, how do we build relationships then with people we haven't met yet? And so I think one of the biggest challenges we're facing is that this year really is more about sustaining than it is about building. And I really wrestle with that. And so what I have to remind myself is that this is also a great opportunity to look at what are the wonderful parts of ministry that we do and that we need to make sure we continue doing, but then are there things that we need to be letting go of in the midst of this too? I think this is a great time to do that. And so like we're doing things like we're trying to reach out to the local communities around our camps and find out, what do they know about us? What do they know about us, and do they know about us even? And if they don't know about us, how could that change? And we're really trying to be intentional. If people are on social media more right now, how can we use social media to our advantage in that opportunity? So yeah, I don't know. We're like everybody else. We're just figuring it out one day at a time. We're looking into virtual opportunities like a lot of other people, of, you know, small groups that we might have some staff who help us lead and maybe not. We're waiting to hear back from Camper Interest, and yeah, so just kind of taking it day by day, week by week, and who knows what the summer is going to look like. For the first time in 7 years, I have no idea what my summer is going to look like.
Oh my goodness. Well,
Derek, Claire, I want to direct something to you in some of what you were talking about on where God's leading you and calling you. And I don't want to necessarily say indecisiveness. That's part of discerning. That's part of discernment. And if it's any consolation to you whatsoever, when I decided that I was going to go to seminary, it was at a strange time in my life. And post my graduation, in 2009, I actually did not seek candidacy because I didn't want to consider being rostered. But lo and behold, I have served as a Senate authorized minister in a congregation for 3 years. Never, ever, ever would I have imagined that. I was the one who was the horse that was not going to drink. So if there's any consolation to you whatsoever, hey, God's way bigger than I ever dreamed that I should be. Okay.
I think the big thing with the indecision and the inaction is kind of this message that I think we get ever since high school of, now what are you going to do? What are you going to do now? How are you going to take the steps to get to where you want to go? But I feel like I'm not done discovering yet, and I don't think I'm ever going to be done discovering yet. And when I really sit with myself, I've come to terms with that. But when everything is telling you to make a decision and to know what you're going to do, that's really hard. And like, when the time comes, it's going to be very clear to me what to do, most likely. Is everything else is going to fall away, or there's just like a natural gravity towards something. Because most of the big decisions in my life, like my major, my college, thus far in my short 21 years, that's kind of how it's gone, where I'm panicking, and then it comes to the moment, and there's just kind of a natural like, okay, I'm gonna do this now. But it's that waiting of, oh no, what do I need to do when the world's telling you that?
And I think sometimes it gets really clear like that too. And sometimes though, it's that like, it's really clear for now and it doesn't have to be forever either. And that was that privilege that I've had of watching my parents change careers and vocations. It's like, okay, it's really clear and this is my path right now. And you know what, that may change in a few years and that's okay.
Yeah. One of the things that we really try to emphasize is that this whole process of vocational exploration is not linear, doesn't go from one place to the next to the next to the next, and it's not even cyclical where you go through a simple cycle. It's much more jagged and jumpy and just not certain where the next step is. One of the things that we'll talk about on the last day of this event is what is our next most faithful step as a way of thinking about our decisions. Not what am I deciding now that's going to be this way forever, but just simply where am I putting this foot in front of the next one? Where am I slowly going? How am I intentionally moving? And notice it's not even intentionally moving forward, just intentionally moving, because maybe you need to go backwards. Maybe you need to learn something that you thought you knew already. Maybe one of the things that you talked about in your story, Jenny, you discovered a place both at camp and at Trinity that you've known before. And that came new kinds of ways for you in your own exploration, right? That's the kind of thing where the step backward may not, in fact, be regression. It might be development in a whole new direction.
Yeah, if you had asked me that if in that year, if you had said that Trinity Lutheran Seminary would be the place that felt like home to me, I would have said you're absolutely insane. I lived across the street for 4 years when my dad was at seminary. I went to Capital. I was there for 4 years, and then I went away for a year. And I thought I was done with Bexley, Ohio. And yet there I was at Trinity Seminary for 2 years. And then the even funnier part was I was ready to graduate. It can go anywhere. Oh, there I am at Christ Lutheran in Bexley, a block down the street for another 7-8 years. I think that's so funny in a whole nother way. But yeah, if you had asked me that if you had said Trinity would be the place that felt like home, I would have said you're crazy.
Yeah. And that I think is part of openness, just being open to what the discovery might give you. Both of you had made a couple of mentions to letting go or making progress. And Jenny, you even mentioned about Lomo specifically. What are the things that we're not going to do anymore when we return to a new kind of normal? I think that's so important for us at Capital and at Trinity and in all colleges and in all seminaries, in all work. There is so much stuff that we filled our lives with to make us feel productive or feel meaningful that we have put on pause right now. And wouldn't you know, God is still showing up. We still have meaning and value and purpose. And in fact, we can find new and abundant life this way. And so I think that is such a wise and important word for us all to hear, that we can find a new normal and should not just return to the way things were before. That's such an unhealthy thing for all of us here, to return to the way things were before. So part of what we can be doing in this discovery process is, all right, what world do we want to build then? What kind of new do we want to build together? What do we want to discover that's worth building? So here's my question for everybody. What's one thing that you want to leave behind? And what's one thing that you want to see in this new era that's coming that is either entirely new or that is getting a lot more attention than it was before this whole COVID process started, and what it is that we want to see blossom and bloom?
I'll tell you, one of the things that I would love to see blossom and bloom, I like that phrase. It's one of my favorite things about the camp that I direct is a family camp for people who may not know. And so it's a little unusual in that families camp together. That's what we do all summer long. And one of my favorite things about that is watching parents, watching adults, watching aunts, uncles, grandparents, learning how to play again. I think sometimes as adults we get serious and we forget to play. And I watched that at camp, And I would love to see that blossom and grow. In this time where people have been home more, where they've been together more with their families. For a lot of people, personally, I've been by myself this whole time, and that's a whole nother story. But those who are with other people, I would love to see that play happen. Having fun together, forgetting to be serious all the time. I think that's something that we should definitely let go, is we take ourselves too seriously sometimes. I'll admit, even when I started making these videos for our social media, like the first ones, I probably stopped and started way too many times because I got to get it perfect. And I had to let go of that, because part of the fun of being together is what happens spontaneously, and the silliness and the mistakes. And I need to let go of that seriousness sometimes and play more.
I'd like to tag off of some of what you're saying, Jenny, in part. And what I came to realize in this period of COVID was how important relationships are. And my bloom and grow is to be much more intentional and about connecting and reconnecting. And it came more fluid to me when I received in the mail pictures of my own family that were given back to me, but a sharing, and it was from the wife of a retired professor of Trinity Lutheran Seminary. And it allowed me to think back to the joyful moments and all the promises that I made about going to visit that didn't happen. And so I'm telling myself to do better at connecting. And what it's done also for me is to start writing letters and sending cards, which has become a lost art because it's so easy to send off an email or a text message. And so I'm receiving those from other people as well, and I want to be more intentional. So if mine is a two-parter about what you want to let go of and what you want to grow and bloom, is to reconnect or to connect in relationship.
I think a big thing I realized after giving my spiel at the beginning, something that really has been characterizing my life recently, and I think always has, is just this overwhelming self-doubt. And like this thought of like, oh, if only I had the time to like cultivate this skill. And now that I have this time and I have this space, like just letting go of that self-doubt and just taking those first steps and knowing things aren't going to be perfect right away or exactly how I want right away. And that's something I am still having to tell myself. Like I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I think just letting go of expectations or how things should be or how things were, and knowing to just take that next step forward and just trying things.
Yeah, for me, I'm self-doubt, shame, those feeling ashamed for not doing things no one has told me to do is this very strange thing that happens inside of my head and my heart like once every 3.5 minutes. And I'm so over it. And I think in large part it's because I'm a people pleaser and I grew up in the kind of family where, nobody was ever mad, but they were really disappointed. Gosh, and I'm just so afraid of that look from someone, whether it's one of my students, one of my colleagues, one of the administrators at Capitol, who just looks at you, not in the way that's angry, but that's the, I thought better of you kind of thing. But again, through entirely uncommunicated expectations. So one of the things I want to leave behind in my own self is the feeling that I have to fulfill people's unspoken expectations. Because one, if they didn't speak it, it may not be, in fact, their expectation. And two, if it is, but they didn't speak it, it's not my fault that they haven't clarified their expectations of me. And I just need to be aware of that enough and own that it's not my baggage, even though you know, that rural Midwest niceness is like, oh no, that's definitely your baggage. I'm like, no, you get away from me, rural Ohio. I don't want that on me. But the thing that I want to find blossom and bloom is this sense of just space I've had to Sabbath and not be completely at rest. But I have read more and I have written more in ways that I have found more life-giving in the last 2 months than I did in the previous 2.5 years at Capital. And I think part of that is remembering that that's actually in my call to be someone who is reading and writing and being engaged with my spirituality. And that's better for me as a pastor for our community to be engaged that way, that blossoming and blooming in that way is a way that I lead, even if it's not in conversation with people, providing pastoral care, leading worship, doing those other things, which are important and holy and wonderful. So that space where we can find the things that are life-giving for our spiritualities, for our faith formations, is something that I really hope blossoms and blooms for everybody. I have one more thought, and y'all can share as many other thoughts as you like, but each of you, Jenny and Mary Claire, have touched on memory. The places that formed you in some kind of way, the families that formed you in some kind of way, the way that memory plays in our formation, in our exploration of our vocations. And I'm always, whenever we talk about memory, I'm always reminded of Jesus's words at the Last Supper, to do this to remember me. And there's this really cool thing about that Greek word, and I'm not going to talk about Greek other than saying it's a Greek word, that's a different kind of memory there. It's not a memory of just like, oh, that fun thing happened. But it's a memory that you bring into reality again. It's you make it alive in the present. And so one of the things that I'm struck by and that I'm really given life as I hear each of you talk is that in your explorations, you had memories that were not just things that happened in the past, but they were memories that took new life for you at these stages of discernment, and that they are still taking new life for you as you're discerning your next steps. So if you have anything else to say about that, that's great. But I felt so enriched as you all talked about that, because it reminded me of Jesus, and I'm kind of a big fan.
I think what's really interesting too, you're right, they're not necessarily things that happened, but they're memories that have shaped and still created. You know, I talk about, you know, the things I've learned from my parents through those memories. And I feel very blessed that I have a close relationship with my parents. And I know that's not the reality for everyone. And I'm thankful for the lessons that I have learned through them. But I also think what's really interesting is that these are lessons that I didn't know at the time. You know, they're definitely not things that when I was 8 years old and we moved to seminary, I went, oh, I'm learning so much right now about, you know, it's okay to change a career and listen to God's call and those sorts of things. But they're definitely things that, you know, when I hit the year after college and I went, oh, I did learn that from my parents, that it's okay to do these things. And I think in some ways, then those memories shape you and your own response, because I want to make sure that I'm showing that to somebody else too, that I'm exhibiting that it's okay to do these things, and that it's that important reminder that the things that we do have power that we'll never know. Yeah, try to remember that, which is both daunting and exciting.
Yeah, it's frighteningly beautiful. It's like, oh yeah, goodness.
Mm-hmm. For me, I know from a storytelling standpoint, especially with like, I remember when we were making these documentaries about people in history, when they're making their decisions, they don't know what's going to happen to them. But when we look back, we do. And then we can see how those decisions altered things or set up new things. And I think the things that I brought up about like when I was playing with my dolls, I didn't realize that it was because I love storytelling, or when I was making videos that then I would want to do that. And I don't know.
I think what you said though, Mary Claire, is interesting. The idea that when we're making these decisions that we don't know the impact they're going to have. And I think that's a really interesting theological question then if you bring it back to Jesus and his saying, do this in memory, to remember me. And did Jesus then, though, know that impact that he was about to have? And if that's I just think that's a really interesting theological question then to wrestle with. I have no answers, but I'm like, ooh, that's really interesting.
That's like meta level theology that we're getting into right there, and I love it.
Welcome to my life right there. That's something I tell the counselors every summer. I'm like, if you want to talk deep theology, come see me. I love it.
Ms. Gabrielle, do you have any other thoughts or questions?
I don't think so at this time. I'm just doing some reflecting before we have, close it up and have more time for reflection. So I appreciate both of you, because both of you, I've been able to see myself in both of you. And then also realize that even at my young seasoned years, there's so much more to learn, to discover, to discern. And it's never too late and it's never too early. And so walking the path that I've walked, and really realizing now that God was present, really understanding God's presence at this point in my life means so much more. And I'm able to give that back to my own children, and also in the capacity for which I serve as admissions directors. I can't tell you how many times in talking to someone, I hang up and say, maybe I shouldn't have gone into sermon mode when I'm recruiting. But there's always an affirmation that comes behind it that says, it was good. It was good.
Well, Mary Claire and Jenny, you have been very good, and we are so grateful for you and your story sharings and the ways that you are helping people to discover and the ways that you shared your own discoveries with us. So blessings on your journeys as you go forth from here, and we can't wait to see what discoveries you make next.
Amen.
Take care, friends.